Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming. It's great to see you all here, especially Greg's two guest readers, Matthew Paul and Maggie Sawkins. We're going to hear first from Greg, then Matthew, a second set from Greg, followed by a set from Maggie, and a final set from Greg to finish the evening. Now, Greg probably needs very little introduction from me, because you're all aware of the excellent work he does as news editor, promoting poetry and poets on writeoutloud.net. And many of you have enjoyed the reading at the open mic nights he hosts in partnership with Rodney Wood at the Lightbox in Woking and on Zoom. We first met Greg when he came to read his poems at our own open mic nights in Guildford several years ago. And of course, when he began his regular open mic, Write Out Loud Woking, we repaid the compliment by reading there. We were very pleased when he sent us Marples Must Go, his first full collection of poems. Greg was for many years a sub-editor on The Guardian, and his professionalism and expertise made it a great pleasure to work with him on his book. His topics appeal to everyone who remember the 1970s, an era whose problems are in some ways echoed in today's Britain, though without the added burden of a global pandemic to exacerbate them. I particularly remember Ernest Marples of the book's title because his policies made it very difficult for me to visit my parents, who lived in Bude in North Cornwall at the time. Greg is something of a railways aficionado, as the title of his debut pamphlet, Train Spotters, shows. That was published by Indigo Dreams in 2015. But Marples Must Go is about much more than railways, just as the 60s and 70s were, just as life today is. Poetry, football, music, and family have all played their part in the compiling of this celebration of the second half of the 20th century and the first fifth of the 21st. For example, Greg is proud to remember watching the second half of England's World Cup drubbing against Germany in a pub in Ludlow with the then poet laureate, Carol Ann Duffy, and in 1972, contributing vocals with hundreds of others on Chuck Berry's #1 hit, My Ding-a-Ling. I'm sure Greg has a lot more stories to tell you, so I'm going to hand over to him now. All right, Greg?
Yeah, can you all hear me okay? Good, I'm taking that as a yes. Thank you, Janice. And thank you, Janice and Donald, for organising this online launch and for taking a chance on Marples Must Go and agreeing to publish it in the first place. And thank you too, Janice, for the wonderful cover, which absolutely fits the bill. I must also thank my son, Jack, who worked for months on an alternative cover, taking in many of the themes in the book. In the end, it didn't quite work as a cover, but remains a wonderful example of his doodling style, and in fact has been inserted as a bookmark postcard in a number of copies that I've sent out, and has been much appreciated. And thanks too to my wonderful guest poets, Matthew Paul and Maggie Sawkins, of whom I will say more at the end of my first and second sets, for agreeing to join me here and take part tonight. So, time for a poem, and the first two are from my primary school days. The Oak Tree. A misshapen old man that barred our way to school. We would sidle past, caps over our eyes, the aged oak in Greenfield Avenue, so wide the path went round it. Startling, lurid growths broke away from its crevices, crumbling at a touch. Aware of beauty, we gathered cobwebs, glistening with dew and sunlight, netting them as gleaming fish in rock pools with bent twigs. In those days, we still saw hedgehogs. They weren't unusual, bumbling along in front of our footsteps or curled up, defying calamity. Free school milk, my first job. How I loved it, maybe more than any other. Carting crates of milk from class to class, my gang of mates, returning for the empties, bottles clinking, metal clanging. Third of a pint for everyone. Girls often left some. The leftover milk smelt funny, but I knocked it back. Blokes going about their business, full of purpose, learning something, camaraderie, teamwork, building muscles. You needed strength to lift those crates. I can't recall the name, but some killjoy put a stop to all that. This next poem is set during my brief time at university, and Janice has already mentioned it, in fact. We've all dreamed of being on a #1 record, haven't we? But maybe not this one. Chuck Berry's Ding-a-Ling. Halfway through the year, I knew I wouldn't make the grade. A freezing night in '72, the time of Bloody Sunday. Tension in Coventry. But rock and roll can save your soul. Johnny be good, lift me from my misery. I had nowhere else to go. The Duck Walk, Nadine, Carol, Maybelline, and that novelty song that must have eaten half the set. The wolfish grin, part shaman, part showman. We bellowed as Chuck gleefully shortchanged us. The joke was they recorded it. Months later, top of the charts, hundreds of us on the vinyl. #1, Ma, that's me. By then, I'd dropped out. But I danced out of the Locarno at midnight, past my mates queuing to see the Floyd. The night that was the start of my comeback. This next poem is about our son Jack taking his football skills to the northeast. Away the lad. It may be just a pre-season friendly. He's the wrong side of 30. I still get the same joy watching him play. Die-hard tackles, rampaging forward, exhorting teammates, lusting for goals. I'm double his age, not in his league. At halftime, he subbed for a while. Jack says at 32, he's lost some pace, matters more at centre-back than in midfield. You just need stamina there. A year ago, he moved up here, outsider, unsure of getting in the local team. A year on, he's given teaching the red card, exhausted by rule changes, but still chosen by the manager. I love the touchline accents, the odd away lad. Afterwards, the players take down the goalposts and, like fishermen, gather in the nets. Now then, Marples Must Go includes a sequence of 5 poems about statues by the sculptor Sean Henry in the town centre of Woking that have done so much, I think, to put Woking on the map and will continue to do so. One of them, Sleeping Man, was of a bloke tucked up under a white duvet. It was in the forecourt of the Lightbox Art Gallery, but was only on loan for a year and has now been returned. So it doesn't appear in the recent poetry film that was made by my fellow poet, Dominic James, called 4 Statues, that can be found on YouTube. Do track it down if you haven't seen it yet. We had a lot of fun making it, that's for sure, until we were moved on by the Peacock's security guards. But I don't like to forget Sleeping Man, who has now finally got out of his bed and gone on his way. So here he is, Sleeping Man. Lennon's song on Revolver. Please don't wake him. No, don't shake him. Did Stagnite friends just leave him here? Comfortable, vulnerable, abandoned. To sleep, perchance to dream. No attribution needed. Purist, not one for floral patterns, likes his bed sheets white, pristine. Hand on the pillow where someone was just hours or maybe years ago. Why did they leave? Absent, inescapable, still in his head. Wake up, mate, and smell the coffee. Duvet day. He is just sleeping, isn't he? The land of Nod. Look, give him a prod. Every day a lie-in when you're furloughed. Okay, this next poem is about the pleasures and perils of taking part in Andram. But I read it, I had a look at it the other night, and it occurred to me that it could also be regarded as a political poem, an extended metaphor for the situation we are in. See what you think. It's called Panto. Quick, open the curtains. What happens next? What's this scene about? Will someone keep those children quiet? What went wrong there? Who missed their cue? Doesn't matter if it goes tits up. It's only Panto, something to keep out winter's chill. Forget what happened at the dress rehearsal. The more mistakes you make, the more the fun. Dirty jokes, ad-libs aplenty, a song and dance or two. We're missing 2 pirates. Has someone seen my bus conductor's cap? You can't come in. The dame's struggling into her 7th frock. Oh, yes, I can. Too old for this game, but yet still know how to play the fool. What if I forget my lines? The words don't come. If silence falls, if there's a pause, say something. Anything. Righty-ho. The final line in this last poem in my first set sums up one of the themes of Marples Must Go. Some of the political references in this poem may be a bit dated now, but the spirit of it mourns all those wonderful childhood comic heroes of the Beano and the Dandy, and wonders what sort of characters they developed into. I would add that I'm a genuine believer and adherent to the term woke and all that it signifies. But so apologies if anything in this poem breaches its tenets in some way. It was written a few years ago. Fine and dandy. Little Plum likes his firewater. Desperate Dan has diabetes. Dennis the Menace lived fast, died young. Walter the Softy won the forward prize for poetry. Hoots, Minnie the Minx is now Scotland's first minister. Bash Street Schools and Academy. Plug lost both legs in Afghanistan. Teacher leads the Labour Party. Crikey, Snooty shot himself in the foot. Colonel Blink took over at UKIP. Whoops, Aunt Aggie's in a care home. Her cow pie is banned by health and safety. Whammo, Beryl the Peril got a job in Brussels. Roger couldn't dodge historic sex offences. Satire's no laughing matter. Why can't life still be hilarious? Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yes, indeed, if only. It's what you make of it, of course. You can always laugh.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Rather than cry.
Can I just say, I'd like to hand over now to the first of my 2 guest poets, Matthew Paul. Janice will introduce Matthew properly, but I'd just like to say how much I admire him as a poet and how much I regard him as a kindred spirit, not least because we grew up around the same geographical hinterland and even went to 2 different schools, but on opposite sides of the same road in Kingston, albeit at quite different times. And now I'll ask Janice to fill in all those important biographical gaps about Matthew that I've omitted.
Well, this is the literary part of Matthew. Matthew Paul's collection, The Evening Entertainment, was published by Eyewear in 2017. And he's also the author of 2 collections of haiku and co-editor of Wing Beats, British Birds in Haiku, which were published by Snapshot Press. Matthew regularly reviews pamphlets for Sphinx and blogs at matthewpaulpoetry.blog. So over to you, Matthew.
Thanks ever so much, Janice, and thank you, Greg. So good evening all. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to start with a poem set at Blarney Castle in August 1983. It's called The Leverets. We've heard the story that every evening beard-up local lads piss on the stone, but it won't stop my brother from clasping the rail above the long drop and arching his back like a Fosbury flop to kiss it. We find ourselves gabbing with an elderly Blanche Dubois. Born in Lancashire in 1899, she emigrated with her parents and siblings 8 years before the Titanic, disembarking at Ellis Island at dawn. Thanks to rosy cheeks, blue eyes, and precocious fluency in English, she snuck through quickly without enduring the hell on earth of the quarantine station. Her family reunited at the Kissing Post, rode the railroad almost forever to Hebron, Kentucky. There, aged 20, she married Harry, a veteran of the Blue and Greys, the handsomest bachelor in Boone County. She's never gotten over losing Harry Jr. at Anzio Beach, a clean shot. Then Harry III in Vietnam, possibly friendly fire, nobody would say or wanted to. It was all too much for her husband's heart. Vacationing with Hebron Catholic seniors stops her going totally doolally. Next week, she'll be taking a detour to Manchester to visit her birthplace. Knows for sure to Cork, we see a mother hare suckling, ears revolving like radars. She hurtles into the next field, leaving the young ones startled, bewildered, twitching their tails, dizzied into bouncing by bellyfuls of milk. I'm absolutely delighted to be part of the launch of Greg's marvellous book. If you've read it or you know his poems in general, you'll know, of course, that Greg evokes times and places with tremendous wit and great poignancy, and it's my absolute pleasure to be reading alongside him. I thought it appropriate to read a poem which I first read at Write Out Loud Woking, which, as Janice says, is the fantastic, wonderfully diverse open mic night which Greg co-hosts with Rodney. This is called The Ballad of Mike Yarwood. The king of impersonation, both the Steptoes, Larry Grayson, Robin Day and Harold Wilson, Doddy, Frosty and Brian Clough, Jimmy Carter against Ted Heath in a battle between their teeth. Prince Charles, Columbo, Michael Caine, Tommy Cooper and Wedgie Ben, Kung Fu's David Carradine. I took them all off to a tee, breaking to grin, and this is me, to introduce Peters and Lee. I spawned the nation's mimicry. Who loves you, baby? Ooh, Betty. Up and under, shilly billy. What's said about imitation is cobbler's. It's pure impression, neither flattery nor flirtation. John Major was too wet to be. Then Spitting Image did for me. Nobody wanted my Brucey. A heart attack made me give up the booze. My Tony Blair was crap. God forfend my Forrest Gump. Within this high security, Weybridge gated community, with other stars as broke as me, I do the ex-wife, my caddy, lawyers, shrinks and Raj the taxi. Only drink reveals the real me, the dubious and the evil, Barrymore, Garnett, Enoch Powell, both the Johnsons, Jimmy Savile, a random mix of shameful blokes and misremembered painful jokes. I mean that most sincerely, folks. So my next poem is set in the town of Clifton Park, Rotherham. Our daily tour of this hinterland, Cleethorpes, is always anti-clockwise. The bowling greens are perfect for bantery kickabouts, Dr. Pepper bottles as goalposts. Gallivanting bulldogs enjoy them too, the plushness of lawn cushioning paw pads. We ramble in tandem between gentle tennis and a fenced-in field where magpies bounce in pairs. Occasional sunrays spark electric blue. How heartened we are to see families play cricket. Mum in a raspberry sari bowls like she's stretching to dunk a basketball and yells at Dad, dreaming at deep mid-wicket, to catch their young son's agricultural swipe, a socially distanced queue for roid ices, slow worms up the hill, blokes ruck up the sandpit with a picture macaroni penguins bellying across the paddling pool, and our ears conjure Maltby miners' welfare onto the bandstand to strike up a medley, the Dam Busters march feeding match of the day. Brighter sun kaleidoscopes the flower beds, Belisha beacon marigolds, pansies spelling NHS, and motley red and white geraniums, the colours of the town's beloved millers, consigned again to League One. The roll call upon the mountainous cenotaph scrolls on and on. And by day, before I put on my Superman poet outfit in the evening, I work in local government. This is a poem which sprung from watching some of those appalling bigwig egos in action. It's called Mayor Making. I wait in the council chamber for the pageantry bollocks to start, wondering how I'll be recorded in the annals. I read my predecessors' names, expertly etched like monarchs with their dates in splendid gold lettering on walnut panels. Those I remember fondly, and the ones I despised or worse, among them many duffers, not the sort of clever Trevors assigned portfolios, yet competent enough, it appears, for heartily pressing the gnashers in photo opportunities, schmoozing the elders of Wale, hard hat donnings on a special school roof, or posing the questions at charity quiz night, the chunky faux gold chain trimmed red robe. As the poster boy for the borough, I'll cheerfully call me a xenophobe. I leap to my feet when the chief executive makes us stand and pray. Patience of Job. So thanks for listening, and if you haven't done already, I hope you do buy Greg's book. And if you have bought it, then you can buy more copies. Finish with another northern poem which was published appropriately in the north. It's called The Prang. My old mate Druggy Douglas whistled along, not giving a monkey's, on a patched up racer, plying his side-to-side wobble that Love Lane could barely accommodate. County bobble hat, raggedy camouflage jacket, but no protection, let alone lights. So when Jen's nifty Mazda nearly hit him as he rode out to thwart the badger cull, she bit his head off. "It's my lookout, Jennifer," he growled from his Viking beard, prompting Jen to retort that nobody wants a death or paralysis on their conscience, which, according to young Tamori, labouring her gap year in the Mason's Arms special, with ferreting trousers and a yellow helmet, not a cycling one, mind, but a builder's. By and by, Mrs. Metcalf divulged he'd taken up with Jamie, her eldest, a twice-divorced child psychologist turned Reiki practitioner, whom, just like Druggy, the village had long ago dismissed as unlovable. I, for one, though, wish them the best of luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. That was lovely. You're pretty full of wit yourself. Thank you. So we're going to go back to Greg for some more poems from the book. Greg, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Matthew. That was sheer Tiffin boys class. That was terrific. Thank you. And the connection from Rotherham just about held up, and it's all perfect. Lovely. Thanks very much. Right. Here we go. On to part 2. So there's no getting away from the fact that there are quite a few political poems in this collection. So apologies if politics isn't really your thing. This second part of my reading does contain some political content. The first one goes back to my university days and my first demo, staged as a protest against a politician known as Milk Snatcher. See earlier poem. If only we'd known then what we discovered the hard way later, there might have been a bigger turnout. As it was, in my naivety, I narrowly avoided being arrested and was manhandled by the police. So you could say I got my money's worth that night. So this is Dust Up in Leamington. Did we somehow know the score? How could we? We were only students mostly, 500 outside the gates on a November night when the milk snatcher union basher came to speak at a Leamington Girls' School speech day. Union basher? Some sort of measure that the education minister had taken against students. Hardly an augury. Milk snatcher? She'd cancelled the school kids' free milk as well. That should have been the warning sign. New kid, arriving early for my first demo, I was close to the police line that buckled when the Bristol young Trotskyists shouted and heaved. Half a dozen of us found ourselves on the other side. One ran madly towards the school. I just stood there awaiting punishment. A sergeant hurled me headfirst into the crowd. A housemate dusted me down. Don't worry, I spat in his eye, saw him wiping it away. I nodded and laughed, but felt a little sorry for the policeman and wondered when he'd get his tea. Okay, we're moving a few years on now. This second poem was written a week before the referendum vote and a few hours before the murder of Jo Cox. It is dedicated to her memory. Clacton, in memory of Jo Cox, MP. Clacton, where my brother found a sodden fiver beside a breakwater, and my mother dried it, spent it on a pair of jeans for each of us. Riches in those days. Sealed with a kiss, poetry in motion. It might as well rain until September on the jukebox. The train from Liverpool Street seemed to go on forever. Now, driving from Clacton through Frinton to Walton on the Naze, past bungalows with England flags and vote leave posters, bearded old motorbikers roaring through villages, forests of wind turbines out at sea, the English in a devil-may-care, passport to Pimlico mood. Give us back our country, starring those family favourites, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Nigel Farage, as if it were all just an Ealing comedy. Now, this next poem is about someone who bears a large amount of responsibility for the mess this country currently finds itself in my opinion. I won't beat about the bush. It's about a death that didn't happen. Unhappy landings. Some days he scours the channel in his boat, binoculars scanning for hapless migrants and leaking dinghies, or sits atop Dover's white cliffs, keeping sentry on Britain's behalf, or barges into budget hotels, hunting down those who have evaded his dragnet, or wipes away the occasional milkshake like seagull poo that has landed as if from the sky on his jacket. Back then, he had tottered, shaken, lucky to be alive, no laughing matter, from a light aircraft on election day, the lead item on the first edition story. By the end of a night, when a divided country failed to make up its mind, his fall to earth was relegated to the last paragraph, already forgotten, a footnote in history, or so it seemed. These days, his face, contorted with fury or snarling laughter, is everywhere, smirking invader of our democracy, stirring up the worst of us with lies and hate, the man of the people with his pint of flat beer and friends in the city, infiltrator disguised as home guard, rabble-rouser, making mugs of us all. Yes, he's still a fruitcake, but laughing at such figures is often a mistake. This one was inspired by the metallic way in which certain politicians repeat certain phrases and slogans over and over again. These slogans can be readily updated, and in fact, I have altered 2 of the 3 for this reading tonight. It was written at a time when we all thought Dominic Cummings possessed more power than he actually did, and I thought he looked remarkably like Davros, the crazed and tyrannical leader of the Daleks. I also fear that my call to the nation in this poem has so far not been heeded. Return of the Daleks. Design classics, some said, put together when Britain still had a bit of an empire. One thought in their heads to take over the world, but inflexible, lacking imagination, no peripheral vision, metallic voices. Hideous inside their casings, extremely intolerant of others not of their kind. Repeating the same words and phrases, take back control, get Brexit done, tear up the protocol, over and over again. Don't cower behind the sofa, England. Come out and push them down the stairs. And this is the title poem in the collection. Ernest Marples was the transport minister who presided over the destruction of large swathes of Britain's railways in the 1960s, at a time when his family firm was involved in motorway construction. A politician on the make or a man of vision? You decide. Thankfully, our politicians are much more honest and above reproach these days. Oh, hang on. Marples Must Go. Slogan daubed on a motorway bridge in the 60s. Left there for decades, for generations of football fans and musicians to wonder at on their way north. A peculiar transport minister, more to blame than Beeching for the vandalism of the railways. He had a pecuniary interest in motorways, a finger in the pie, you might say. There was Profumo, but few knew at the time that Ernie had a fetish for dressing up in women's clothes and being chastised. He richly deserved every stroke of the lash. The M1 peters out north of Leeds, merges with the A1, a much older road. Turn left for Barnard Castle, if you can read the signs. Marples must go. And go he did. After getting his peerage, flitting on the night ferry to Monaco to escape a huge tax bill. He's history. Just another perverse politician putting his foot down on our road to ruin. Thank you very much. Here endeth the second lesson. And this is where I'd like to pay my own tribute to Maggie Sawkins, my second guest poet of the night. Maggie has been a good poetry friend for a number of years. She was kind enough to give me a lot of helpful advice with an earlier version of this collection and has always been very supportive. She's been a tower of strength on the Portsmouth poetry scene for a long time and recently moved across the water to the Isle of Wight, to a railway station master's house, no less, and is already beginning to make her poetry presence felt on the island. Thank you, Maggie, for agreeing to read for us tonight.
Thank you. Oh, yes, I'm on. Yes, we've known Maggie for quite a while too, because she was so active down in Portsmouth in Southsea. Tongues and Grooves was an amazing night. She delivers creative writing projects in community and healthcare settings, probably in the Isle of Wight now. She hasn't said so, but I expect so. And she's performed her award-winning live literature production, Zones of Avoidance, in theatres, art centres and prisons. Her collections include Charcot's Pet, The Zigzag Woman, Many Skies Have Fallen, and Zones of Avoidance. Her latest collection, The House Where Courage Lives, is due to be published next spring by Waterloo Press. So we're looking forward to hearing your poems, Maggie.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, for inviting me. And I always remember that memorable evening at the Rifle Club and the Labour Party fundraiser that you came along to. That was brilliant. Yeah, actually, I always wanted to be a journalist, but being good at English, I did a secretarial course instead. But one of my most memorable jobs was working for a community newspaper called the Exeter Flying Post. And we had an office above a hairdresser's in the narrowest street in the world, Parliament Street. My mother said it was like living in a rabbit hutch, the terraced house where I was born. So perhaps it wasn't a fluke that led me to work in a tiny office in the brass-placked, narrowest street in the world. 3 days a week, I typed up articles on an IBM daisy wheel for the Exeter Flying Post. When the crossword compiler went off sick, I was asked to step in, but my clues, I was told, were either too cryptic or not cryptic enough. Once, the editor invited me along to a lunchtime launch of the Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady. It was the first time I'd seen a caviar canapé or tasted champagne. Back at the office, we were so tipsy we had to lie down on the floor. This is how the future finds us. The door left open, the walls tilting inwards. It's all true. And so one of the perks of the jobs was being invited to go along and interview the visiting bands. So on this occasion, it was Darts. Come back, my love. That night, I met Darts backstage. I was high, not on jungle juice, just the fizz. Me being asked along by the Flying Post chief reporter to interview my favourite band. Bob Fish kissed my hand, and Rita Ray gave me a signed copy of their LP. I knew nothing then about sections or dual diagnosis, the steps you must take to visit your loved one in a women's prison. I'd only been married once to some guy from Balham who had a bedside lamp called Plato. And even though I'd read Crime and Punishment and Wilson's Outsider, I knew nothing about keeping knives tidied away in kitchen drawers. I hadn't done anything much, never picked up a piece of the Berlin Wall, smelt fruit bats from a Port Douglas veranda at midnight, seen the way trees in a rainforest strangle each other. But that night I knew all about doo-wop. That night I was attraction. That night I didn't wash my hands. This is one of my favourite books. You see, 100 experiments in the philosophy of everyday life. And number 17 is, oh, I can find it. There's that one. Peel an apple in your head. So this poem's inspired by that. Peel. One day you'll find yourself in an old armchair, in an old sweater, peeling an apple so slowly that the peel will unravel in one long spiral to the floor. So slowly you'll forget about going out without polishing your shoes, that your jacket has lost 3 of its 4-eyed buttons. Instead, you'll sink into the seat and focus your mind on the beautiful bones of your feet while staring at your naked apple. You'll close your eyes and Wilson will pad his way back into the old kitchen. You'll fetch him a bonio from the larder, pour yourself a drop of the Irish, and remember a snatch of the dream or you're climbing Croak Patrick with your barefoot mother. If the woman in the chair next to you wakes with the offer of a minto, you'll refuse, because you have your apple and Wilson at your feet wearing his tiny spiral hat. So next one is also about apples and a knife. And I'd like to thank Alan Hum, who's the editor of the marvelous One Hand Clapping journal, and published this. Pleasure. The knife handle was antique bone. I waited until I was alone, then peeled an apple in my head, the flesh stark white, the skin blood red. I ate that apple to its core and gathered more than several more. I saved the pips for another time. Imagine this, my only crime. And just do one more. So this is the first poem in my new collection, and it's called When You're Alone in Your Bed. Let the house sleep, it has secrets to keep. Draw the curtains tight, silence the walls, extinguish the lights in the rooms and the halls. Deceivers, we're more alone than a dog without a home, Narcissus in a dream, a face in a stream, the footprint of a hair, a broken kitchen chair. More alone than a marble in a game of solitaire. There are secrets to keep. Let the house sleep. Thank you.
Beautiful poems. Thank you. Thank you very much. And so I'm going to go back to Greg now, and he's going to read us some more from his book. So, Greg.
Yes, thank you, Maggie. I mean, and especially that last poem. It's made me very keen to read your new collection as soon as it's out. It's a wonderful taster. So, thanks for a wonderful reading. Thank you. Right, let's crack on with the last part of this launch. So the final group of poems I'd like to read tonight are characterized by their setting, which is Spain. That's where our daughter Kate lives with her Spanish husband and two lovely small children. Her adventures there have added another dimension to our lives and to my writing. This first poem is called The Gap Years. Thank you, Kate, for providing me with so much inspiration. At the office, I boast of your adventures, cheering on Chelsea in faraway bars, trying to ski in the Pyrenees, taking 3 trains to Athens at New Year, catching the overnight bus to Madrid, driving to Stansted on rain-lashed mornings, watching for speed traps, the careful parent. You do those things we should have done when we were young but never did. Had you and your brother, I suppose, instead. The TV that kept switching itself on in that icy house with the ghost in Osuna, searching for the perfect tapas bar. That bust of Hemingway in Pamplona. I've read The Sun Also Rises. You lived there. We found ourselves in Marbella on the night of the 2019 election in Britain. That was the election result, which meant that Brexit would finally get done one way or another, a result that we weren't very happy about. This is called The Morning After and was published in the New European Newspaper. The morning after, the last hope gone, we find ourselves in sunshine with family in Marbella beside a fountain sculpture, a beauty and unity reflecting civic pride, what might have been. Playing with our Anglo-Spanish grandchild on the swings and slides. She careers across the pavement on a little bike. I struggle to keep up with her, and as I screw my features into laughter faces, she mimics every one. She calls the motorway tunnels along the Costa del Sol the Big Dark. That evening, the people of the barrio sing carols beneath our flat with guitars, harmonies, their brazier, a beckoning beacon, bright. And it's surely fitting that I end with the last poem in the book. I've lost my place. Which is about Spain and our family out there, and about COVID too. It's called Love Makes You Reckless. It also refers to a location, Benahavis, where I believe our blessed leader has been sunning himself this very week. And it's about a trip we made to Spain almost a year ago. Love makes you reckless. Grandchildren in another country, growing up on FaceTime before our eyes. Joy of a family Sunday lunch in Benahavis. Lockdown blurted out after we flew to Spain. A determined wife vetoing my fears. Me wondering when or if we might ever go home. Love makes you reckless. Full moon at Halloween. Sitting on Kate and Juan's patio, looking across the valley to the hill and mountain beyond, thinking absurdly of my own grandmother's tiny back garden terrace, close to the Kingston bypass, where I always felt nothing but love. The cactus and palm and the orange chrysanthemum that blooms brightly in November. La Concha Mountain spreads its outstretched limbs almost to the shore. On San Pedro Paseo, I remove my mask and for the first time smell the sea. Thank you very, very much. It just remains for me to thank once again my two wonderful guest poets tonight, Matthew Paul and Maggie Sawkins, for their wonderful readings, Janice and Donal for all their support and help in putting this evening together, and for publishing my book in the first place. And to you all, many of you who have already read Marples Must Go and still turned out tonight. Thank you all.